Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to set up a model and sample from the model in StatCrunch. We're going to start off with a model for a single proportion. So let's think about a deck of cards, and in particular let's focus on the suit of the cards in the deck. So a standard deck of cards has 4 suits. The cards could be clubs, spades, hearts, or diamonds. And let's say we're interested in the percent of the cards in the deck that are clubs. So I'm going to set up a model for a deck of cards where 40% of the cards are clubs. So I'm going to call this my 40% model. And now there's a bunch of different ways you can set up a model. What's important is that 40% of the entries in the list correspond to clubs. So one way to do this is you could type clubs, 4 clubs, and 6 not clubs. So this is a list where 4 out of the 10, or 40%, of the entries are clubs. Now I could have made 4 clubs and 2 diamonds and 3 spades and 1 heart. It doesn't really matter what the other things are, as long as 40% of what's in there corresponds to clubs. You don't have to use 10 things. I could have made a model like this that has 2 clubs, 3 not clubs. Here, 2 out of my 5, or 40% of the entries, are clubs. So the next thing we can do is we can simulate drawing cards from this model. And one thing that's going to be important here is we're going to simulate drawing with replacement. That is, after one card or one item comes out of our list and we look at it, we're going to put it back in and shuffle it again, which is not something that happens typically when you're playing a game of cards, but that's going to be important here. So to simulate drawing a hand, let's say we're going to draw a hand of 8 cards from our list. So you go to Data and then Sample. We're going to sample from our 40% model. We're going to make a sample size of 8. I'm going to do 1 sample, and I'm going to sample with replacement. And if I hit Compute, then I just sampled randomly from my list of 10 things. And in this first sample, there were 2 not clubs and 6 clubs. And I could sample again, sample from my model, sample size of 8. I'm going to sample with replacement. And this time I got 4 not clubs and 4 clubs. So I got half and half. Each time we take a sample, because we're selecting randomly and doing this with replacement, then we're going to get a different result. So one little thing about StatCrunch is it's going to run into some trouble if you have multiple variables that have the same name. So I'm just going to rename this first one. I'm going to call this sample 1. I'm going to call this one sample 2. And now we'll be able to distinguish things from each other. So not only can StatCrunch create individual samples, it can also summarize each sample. It can compute a percent or a mean for each sample. So let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to go down to Sample. I'm going to sample from my model, the sample size of 8. This time I'm going to do 1,000 samples and sample with replacement. Now if I split this across columns, it would create 1,000 new columns, and I could look at each one. But what we're going to do here is we're going to compute a statistic for each sample. We're going to compute the percent of the sample that's clubs. So I select this. Once you have some more practice, you might want to type things in manually to this bar, but for now I'm going to build it. We're going to go down to the sum function. I have to scroll down a little bit. So we're going to sum in our sample, where our sample is equal to clubs. So this is going to add up the number of times in our sample that we get clubs. So I go to OK. And I'm going to call this number of clubs in hand. And I compute. OK. So what this is saying is in the first hand, it drew 2 out of the 8 cards were clubs. In the next one, 5 were clubs. In the next one, 2 were clubs. In the next 3 were clubs, and so on. So this is a way to use StatCrunch to set up a model and to simulate sampling from that model and summarizing the statistic you get.